evolved to be of that form. So to fully understand something, you need both levels of explanations. You need to understand the mechanics of the phenomenon, but then you have to unfold the Darwinian why. So when the 2-year-old is asking why, in a sense, he is a Darwinist. He is trying to seek that ultimate explanation for the phenomenon. So
you are just pushing Darwinism just every chance you get. Hey, you want to have a soda? You know, Darwin liked soda. Let's do one piece of political stuff.
Do it. What do I think of Trump? Is that where you're going? No.
Yeah, Trump.
You want to do that?
And what's happening in the media and with people because of Trump.
The hysteria, the collective Munchausen.
Yeah.
So in 2010, I think I mentioned this briefly on your radio show. In 2010, I wrote a paper in a medical journal where I talked about something called Munchausen syndrome. Munchausen syndrome is where you got a smirk on your face. Why is that?
I just love you. I wish I was your neighbor.
I reciprocate the warm feelings. So Munchausen syndrome is where someone feigns a medical condition so that they can garner empathy and sympathy. Oh, poor me, look at me, I'm sick. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is where you take someone who's under your care, your biological child, your pet, your elderly parent, and you harm them so that you can get and garner the sympathy and empathy by proxy because they're damaged, right? So this is called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And by the way, the ones who suffer most from that are usually women who harm their biological children to garner the sympathy. Mm-hmm. So I had written a paper talking about the psychiatric disorder. And then when I started seeing the faux victimhood, the screaming, the fake hysteria associated with Trump, that's when I coined the term collective Munchausen, because it was a way for people to seek attention in grotesque ways, in truly what seemed to me in false sounding ways, right? I mean, I would see on my Facebook page people sort of testifying to their looming victimhood. I am a woman of color. I attend the University of Maine. Will it still be safe for me to go to college now that Trump... Well, what do you think? There's going to be roadblocks and the Trump storm patrols are going to be ushering you to gang rape centers? Mm-hmm. I mean, what can justify this level of idiotic hysteria? And so that's why I called it collective Munchausen, because it truly was a confabulation of faux hysteria. What upsets me is that it's one thing for this idiot on my Facebook page to write this stuff. It's another thing when many of my supposedly sophisticated intellectual friends were succumbing to the same hysteria. Mm-hmm. That's what upsets me. So I won't mention any names, but one of my good friends, whom you probably know, is one of the type who will say things like, there's going to be food shortages now that Trump, there's going to be a nuclear holocaust. He's the worst thing since Hitler. And this is a guy who otherwise you would have thought is a terribly sophisticated and dispassionate thinker. And so it's a real mystery to me why they are...
What causes that? What caused that in him?
Yeah.
I think I know who you're talking about. Very smart guy, very reasoned.
Very. I mean, he's sort of the model of the very dispassionate, right? So I pitched an idea on the Rubin report as to why I think this is happening. I think that the intellectual class views Trump as what I call an aesthetic injury, right? You know how this beautiful place that you're in, I mean, is gorgeous aesthetics, right? You have a nice aesthetic sense. Well, academics and intellectual types have a sense of the types of aesthetics that they seek in their leader. Barack Obama fit that. He's tall. He's got a beautiful smile. He speaks with a certain cadence of a Southern Baptist preacher. He seems noble and majestic. So it doesn't matter what he says, that most of it is complete bullshit. But my God, he sounds noble and intellectual. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump is an ogre. He speaks in an ugly way. He's grotesque. He's a brawler. He's a New Yorker. He's swearing. He's grabbed this, right? Mm-hmm. So on every possible aesthetic metric, he offends my sense of aesthetics. And so I think they are disgusted by him. They are repulsed. It's visceral. And that's why it is no longer within the realm of the rational, because they really are responding at the most visceral level. He disgusts me. And so I think that's...
So there were... because I was against Barack Obama. And for many of the same reasons, I warned about Donald Trump.
Right.
Where it's don't get into a cult.
Right.
Don't get into a cult. And I was called a racist for saying, look at the way he views white people in his book. Well, that's just the way white people will do you. Well, my grandmother was white, and she was the typical
Well,
white
the church
person.
that he used to go to, which
The
was...
church right, okay. And to just take those out and say, does that mean anything? Racist.
Right.
He's a socialist. Racist. And they saw race in everything, even though I think I had some pretty good logical reasons to point out that had nothing to do with race. That's all they saw. Is this... How do they not see that they're doing exactly the same thing? And except they don't always have the best solid reasons. You look at Donald Trump and you can say he's a mess. He's bad for culture. He's bad for this. He's bad for that. But they are not doing that.
Right.
They just despise the man.
Yeah.
How do they walk that?
Well, I think,
is it just okay?
Well, I think cognitive inconsistency and moral hypocrisy is easy to support when you are so ideologically driven, right? I mean, so there's a thing in behavioral decision making called axioms of rational choice, which Dick Thaler, by the way, the guy who wrote Nudge, is a big guy of. So, for example, if I prefer car A to car B and I prefer car B to car C, I should prefer car A to car C. This is called the transitivity axiom. If you don't do that, you're being irrational. So a hallmark of good thinking is to be cognitively consistent. And yet these buffoons are never cognitively consistent because they are so parasitized by their ideological disdain towards this man, right? So, for example, when I went on Sam Harris's show, and I'm not saying that the guy that I spoke of a few minutes ago was Sam Harris or not, but when I went on Sam Harris's show, I explained how psychologically people could arrive at choosing Donald Trump in a very rational way. And let me maybe propose it here. So there is a decision rule called the lexicographic rule. The lexicographic rule basically says when you're choosing between two alternatives, look at your most important attribute. For example, if you're choosing between two cars and if gas efficiency is your most important attribute, you look at your most important attribute and the car that scores the best on that attribute, you choose. So let's apply now the lexicographic rule to Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Let's suppose I'm going to use the lexicographic rule and immigration is my most important attribute. Rightly or wrongly, if I think that Trump performs better on immigration than Hillary Clinton and I use the lexicographic rule, I would very rationally choose Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. So here I have offered you a road by which millions of people could have chosen Donald Trump without being redneck KKK members who sleep with their sisters. Yet these guys all thought that 60 plus million people, all of them, could have only been rabid racists. And that, again, disappoints me because you should know better. You should be smarter than that. Yet they were parasitized by their disdain for Trump, and it pisses me off.
I think there was a couple things going on as well, and I misread it because I thought people were looking for something else. They weren't. They were so tired of the lies of people getting away with murder, of being called a racist for anything that they had actual belief in. And they saw this guy who all of a sudden they might have gone ick, but then they saw he's beating everyone. This is working, and everything we've tried doesn't work. And I don't like that. But I think he might be able to, because he'd just belly up to the table and, fart and then say, whoops, I farted.
Right.
Look, you're a clown.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Authenticity. He's authentic.
Right. He's at the same time, for instance, come on, sleeping with the stripper. That's a no-brainer, okay, for Donald Trump. That's a no-brainer. Of course that happened. And we all have baked that in. You see Donald Trump, strippers, affair with him, probably, but you've baked it in.
Right.
And so they've taken and they've seen, okay, I don't like his lifestyle. I don't like that. But I like the fact that he might be lying to me about these things, but he's saying the truth that I believe to power.
Yes.
And that's more important.
And the fact that he was someone from outside of the establishment, right? He had the potential to be the disruptor that the zeitgeist needed. And so for